Happy Friday, everyone. John Lorden here. Thank you for joining me on another episode of BrainScratch. Today's case came to me in a bit of an unusual fashion. I was actually handed a folder in real life filled with a bunch of research on this particular case. I want to give a very big thank you to A and R. I don't know if they want their names going out there. This is a local case, so just to be safe, A and R, thank you so much. You know who you are, and you helped make this happen today, and I really appreciate that. We have a family that has lost someone very close to them in a very dramatic fashion. The official ruling on it, it's not really easy to agree with when you dig into the details quite a bit. They're very frustrated with law enforcement. We're going to cover all that as we're going through the case of Elisa Gomez. But let's start with a bit of the bright spot in terms of Elisa's life. And here you can see her doing something that she obviously loved to do. She's painting. Starting with an article over at paintsquare.com, we're going to talk about a piece of art, this piece of art right here, that is in a local stadium here in Minneapolis. The new stadium that hosts home games for the National Football League's Minnesota Vikings is also the site of some massive mural art, thanks to two local artists and a team of student interns from the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. U.S. Bank Stadium's main concourse includes the Golden Pass, an abstract mural based on the football shape and the golden ratio. Being situated in Minneapolis, it also, of course, features plenty of purple. A lot of purple if you live out here. You'll see it all over the place. Charbonneau and Zopinski worked with 6 student interns. One of those student interns is the person that we're talking about today, Elisa Gomez. So let's learn a little more about Elisa. This is her Facebook page, and right off the bat, we can see many photos of dogs. To say she's a dog lover probably doesn't explain it well enough. This is a person that rescued dogs regularly, did a lot of good work for animals and people. I can tell you guys that just in researching this case, I've already heard of several very touching stories about Elisa and what she did for her local community, literally giving food to people, just driving all kinds of distances to help animals. And even if you look through her Facebook page, you can see a lot of communication that is essentially about her close group. But that close group actually is her community. It's not just her friends and family. You can see that she really reaches out in all kinds of different ways. But she does certainly have a particular love for dogs, as you can see in here. So some of this information that's been put together in this packet includes info directly from her mother, Judy Hunt. And that's where we're going to get some of the details that aren't in the public versions of this story. At this point, there's only a few articles that are left online that are even referencing this story. Thankfully, one of them is written very, very well, and it's kind of a long-form narrative, so we're going to lean on that one quite a bit. But let's get a bit of a sense of who she was from her mother's words. She raised 2 great kids, her son in the U.S. Air Force and her daughter seeking a career in forensic science. Elisa drove hundreds of miles rescuing animals and helped every human that came her way. She was full of compassion for any living creature. She was one of the 5 artists that painted the mural inside the U.S. Bank Stadium. She worked hours and hours on that. Her name is on a plaque on the wall of the stadium. She taught at a Korean school in St. Paul, and they loved her. They dedicated a wall for Elisa at the school. I wish to God she would have done a background check on him. If she had, he would have been history. And who's the man that her mom's referring to there? It is this man, Brad Alexander, her husband, for about 12 hours before she died. We're just getting started on this mystery. Let's go ahead and move forward to Star Tribune. This is the obituary for Elisa. Gomez, Elisa A., age 47 of Minneapolis, survived by her children, Jade, Jess, and Abigail, parents Judy Hunt and Richard Gomez, as well as many other loving family members. We are terribly saddened and will miss her tremendously. Your bright light will shine forever. Now, one of the websites that is still available that has written an article on this case actually belongs to what looks like a private investigation and protection firm called R. Stephen Rogers. Let's go ahead and read their analysis. They're kind of upset about how this crime scene was processed, and I think they have good reason for that, especially with the info they present here. Last October, and that's October of 2016, Elisa Gomez was found deceased in her home with a scarf around her neck. She was, by all accounts, a positive and happy person, an art teacher who painted art on her walls and advocated for rescuing animals. Elisa was married mere hours earlier to a man she had known less than a month. The couple celebrated at a local bar, then continued celebrating at home. At around 2 to 3 in the morning, John Ganapes, a neighbor, called 911 concerned about commotion outside his window, telling police that the woman sounded very distraught. Later, another 911 call brought police back to find Elisa dead. Reports do not show who placed the second 911 call. Police were on scene less than an hour, and according to Elisa's sister Angela, never secured the property as a crime scene. Now, this is the author saying this. This goes against my professional training in 2 decades in emergency medical services, which is to treat all death scenes as crime scenes until the coroner takes control of the scene. And then he goes into, I'm not going to go over it all, but he's actually citing the Minnesota statutes about what should happen in cases like this. And they do seem to support his conclusion that essentially this should have been locked down until a coroner could have arrived and determined what was really going on with that scene so that it could be processed further from there. The medical examiner revealed that the cause of death was ligature hanging, but could not determine if it was homicide, suicide, or accidental. Obviously a very big problem when they can't figure that aspect out. And we're going to get into some more details that her mom has put together, but there's some strange conditions around where she's found also. Essentially, she was not hanging when they found her. She was on the ground. Someone else that lives at the home says that they cut her down with a pair of nail clippers. We'll get into more of that later. The context is quite clear from the MPD's manual. If the death is suspicious in nature, the scene is to be completely and immediately secured. While the authorities did talk to her husband, he is not considered a suspect or person of interest, despite his history and multiple convictions for domestic violence. 2 misdemeanor domestic assault convictions and, much more interestingly, a felony domestic assault by strangulation conviction. He has a number of other charges and convictions, including terroristic threats. So right off the bat, you look into this guy's history. In particular, guy served time for strangling someone. Now we have his current wife of somewhere around 12 hours being found dead with I believe it's a silk scarf around her neck that supposedly she had hung herself from a rafter in the basement. But she's not hanging from the rafter. She's on the ground. Very, very odd here, and I'm really surprised that that scene wasn't locked down and processed thoroughly. But unfortunately, it appears that that's what's happened, at least according to the information that we're getting from the family. So I did find a link to another article, but the article is gone. Once again, I have to give a very big thank you to Web Archive. I was able to pull up a resurrected version of this article from January 17th, 2017. Loved ones of 47-year-old Elisa Ann Gomez made a plea to police to take a closer look at her unforeseen death. Her family insists there's more to it, and 3 months after abruptly saying goodbye to Gomez, her dad Richard admits, "We have a lot of questions that aren't being answered." Gomez's mom, Judy Hunt, still struggles for words to describe her loss. She would not leave the world like that. She just wouldn't, Hunt said. The Gomez family sat in a room with reminders of Elisa everywhere. She painted artwork on the walls. Gomez was an art teacher at Sejong Academy. She was also an animal rescue advocate, mother, and only hours before her death, she also became a wife. Her relatives say they never met Gomez's new husband. In fact, she'd only known him for a month. Other accounts I'm seeing say it was closer to 2, but we get it. It's a very short period of time, particularly to go through a whole courtship and get married. "I believe he played a role in her death," Hunt said. Gomez's sister Angela said she feels like the death investigation fell short. I don't believe they've done their job. They were at her home for an hour, viewed it as a suicide, and didn't even lock down the home as a crime scene. And there's something else her family wants others to know. He never showed up for the funeral. The grieving husband never showed up for the funeral. Her family points out when Gomez met her husband, he was homeless and jobless, and in one fateful night, he inherited everything she owned. Now, I did see a conversation thread talking specifically about the fact that he didn't show up to the funeral. And people were making some decent points, but then other people were making some really strong points. I get that he might have not wanted to show up at the funeral if he's aware that the family thinks that he's involved in her death, directly involved. However, he probably could have made arrangements to go and have a private viewing. I mean, this is someone he's supposedly in love with. If it was 1 month, 2 months, whatever, it was enough that he went and got married to her. But she dies that night, and he doesn't go and say his final goodbyes to her in some way, pay respects in some way. It doesn't really make me feel good about what's going on here. And then we get this point. This guy was basically homeless and jobless when she found him. She found him on Craigslist. She was actually looking for some help. We're going to get into some more of those details also. And all of a sudden, in one day, in one 24-hour period, he goes to marrying her. And I guess at that point, we could assume that half of what she had was his, to her dying. And now everything that she had was his. And this is a woman that was really... she was doing great things with her life. She had gotten a new vehicle. And even when she got her new vehicle, one of the first things she did was go on Facebook and tell people, hey, I've got this new vehicle. If you need a designated driver for tonight, I'd be willing to take you home. $10 one way. It's just that kind of... That's what breaks my heart about this story. You have someone that's so caring and looking to help other people. And is that part of what plays into this situation? Even the fact of Brad coming into her life. Are we looking at a situation where she felt like, yeah, he's down and out, but I believe in him and we can put a new life together with each other and make something better than it was? I truly believe that was her intent and that's what she saw there. But was it a risky proposition because of who he was and his past? It certainly seems like it was. So let's get to the very well-written article over at City Pages, and I want to give a very big shout out to Susan Dew for writing this article and doing such a great job pulling together all these different facts and putting it out in one cohesive way. I'm not going to read the whole article. I'm going to go through a lot of it because there's just not a lot of other articles out here, but if there's only one other piece of media that you look into with this case, I highly recommend that you make it this article. It really deserves the extra time and attention. I think it'll give you just a little additional insight. I'm going to cover all the important bullet points, but it might give you a little more insight, in particular into who Elisa was and how her family is really responding to and coping with all this. From wedding to body bag in 12 hours, what happened to Elisa Gomez? This was written March 8th, 2017. On a random Monday afternoon, 47-year-old Elisa Gomez announced through a series of giddy text messages that she'd gone down to the Hennepin County Government Center to get married. She'd met her new husband, 30-year-old Bradley Alexander, on Craigslist not 2 months prior. He was a mystery to all who knew her. Her mother, Judy Hunt, was alarmed that it all happened so fast. Still, she understood her daughter well enough to know that there was no telling the headstrong woman what to do once she made up her mind. Elisa promised a lush garden wedding still to come in April, a real spectacle with a wedding gown and bridesmaids for all to attend. That night, she and Brad celebrated at the Cedar Inn Sports Bar just down the block until about 1 a.m. None of Elisa's closest friends could make it. The marriage was so sudden, they all had to work the next day. Keep in mind, they got married on a Monday. Around 2:30 a.m., a neighboring family overheard an argument. The woman could be heard screaming and crying, while the man repeatedly yelled the F word. The neighbors called 911, but by the time the officers drove by, the two had vanished. Later that morning, around 9 o'clock, Elisa's adult daughter, Jade Gomez, arrived at her mother's house for a pre-planned breakfast date. Instead, she found the place surrounded by police cars and watched as medical examiner personnel packed her mother's lifeless body into a body bag. Terrible, terrible. I can't imagine what Jade went through in that moment. I think easily the worst moment of her life. But once again, this is kind of pointing to Elisa had plans that were going on. Literally the next morning, she's supposed to have breakfast with her daughter. We know that she had animals that she was taking care of. On top of the work that she does for the Korean Center, she also did work on the side, walking animals and taking care of animals as well. And there was a dog that was actually being cared for her at that time, staying in the house through all of this. So a lot of responsibilities that she had going on. And from what I'm seeing, she wasn't a person to have ever complained about that. She was a person that was always busy, just kind of always ran at that level. Never was a person known to, get depressed and go, lie in bed for a day or something like that. Just wasn't in her makeup to be that type of person. Now, can that absolutely rule out the possibility that she ended her own life? No. We've covered enough cases on this channel before where people can go to very dark and strange places, and sometimes they can make decisions that just seem outside of their character to everyone that loves them and everyone around them that sees them. So can we write it off with 100% certainty? No. But with the conditions that we have going on here, with someone that seemingly benefits so much, and we haven't even got to how he treats these new items that come into his possession yet. Something very strange is happening here, not to mention his past. There's just, this is one of those cases where there is so much smoke, there's a fire, but for some reason, it's like no one can get law enforcement to acknowledge that there certainly is a fire. And law enforcement it's weird because at this point, even if they do believe that Brad has something to do with this, how do you prove it at this point? Because that crime scene wasn't locked down originally, because it wasn't forensically processed, because they were only in there for, the story is it was an hour, maybe it's more realistic to say that they were there for 2 hours, whatever. They didn't do a full crime scene lockdown and a forensic processing, and that might have made the difference in a case like this, understanding it later. So how do you, at this point, when you've already gone down the road of those decisions, how do you turn back and say, oh, well, we really should have done this or really should have done that? I personally don't think you're going to hear that from law enforcement. It's not very often, quite honestly, that I see law enforcement acknowledge mistakes like that. It's actually extremely rare, and I see a lot of law enforcement engaging the public. I see a lot of family members that are hurt by law enforcement or angry with law enforcement. I think that's a better way of saying it. So I see this dynamic quite a bit. But do they have a really good reason to be angry in this case? Certainly. Absolutely. This really, something smells very, very bad about this case. And unfortunately, we now don't have the forensic information to really lean on to point us in the direction of, oh, we called it. There was a fire, and here's why we know it, and we can prove it, and now we can make someone pay for this. So I totally understand their frustration. Elisa was an art teacher at a Korean immersion school in St. Paul. She ran a dog walking business on the side, making a piecemeal living while pursuing a bachelor's in fine arts from the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. Her home was a menagerie of beagles, her best friends, fellow fanatics of the rescue world. Elisa was always calling her mother from the road, in the middle of spontaneous group excursions to deliver food to understocked pounds in far-flung cities. She was forever painting to benefit dog charities or scheming to rope unwitting family members into volunteering. There was her son, 22-year-old Jess, who'd been deployed to Kuwait with the Air Force for nearly a year. His birthday came the week after Elisa's death. She had been planning a party for his return. So once again, and I know we can't look at this as proof, but I just want to point out, plans with her daughter for the following day. Plans with her son for a week from then. We also have a plan with a friend that's coming up for a trip later that year. This is a woman who had an active and full life, a lot going on. And no one, at least in the media that I've reviewed, no one is stepping up to say, well, I actually noticed something was wrong. She went and spoke to someone at some point. In the Amber Evans case that I covered on Searchlight a few weeks back, there was at least some type of indicators that something like this might have been going on. Now, Amber was a bit more of a public person. There was literally articles being written about her. And because of that, we got some quotes where it kind of pointed us towards, you know what, this is a young woman that's struggling in some way. In this case, I can't find that. We don't have any indicators of that. A sudden and silent departure was not Elisa's style at all, her mother says. She was a spark plug with a million projects, a princess personality type who flavored everything she did with dramatic flair. Her life was completely full, Hunt says. She was never the type to spend a day in bed feeling sorry for herself. Elisa met Bradley Alexander when he responded to her Craigslist ad for some muscle to help around the house and walk dogs. Passion erupted so instantly that it defied family and friends' comprehension. One minute, Elisa was offering to drive Brad home to his then-girlfriend after work. The next, he'd packed his bags and moved in with her instead. And here is a picture of Brad. Elisa told fellow rescuer El Bordeaux through Facebook chat, Brad was a good man with a tragic past. His mama abandoned him when he was 13 and he had to take care of his sister, Elisa wrote. He had some DWIs, etc., but I know him well and I love his heart. Pictures of Brad began to pop up on her Facebook page. Soon, Elisa started gushing about marriage. And this is a photo of Elisa and her mother, Judy. I did reach out to Judy before filming today's episode. I didn't give her a whole lot of time to get back to me, unfortunately, so I'm hoping that we might still connect. And if Judy has more information, she is welcome to come on the channel here and share that with us. But I just wanted to put a quick message out here to Judy and the rest of the family as well. I'm just really sorry that you guys are dealing with this, and I'm sorry that you probably feel pretty alone in dealing with this because of what's going on with law enforcement's perspective on this case versus what you guys are dealing with in this case. So my heart goes out to you, and I hope that you appreciate what we're doing here on the channel today, and I hope it helps ultimately. That's what we're here trying to do. Richard Gomez, Elisa's father, met Brad just once. Elisa's mother bought him lunch one day. They each found Brad unremarkable, mild in every way. They say they were much more uneasy about his lightning-paced courtship of their daughter, which seemed unnecessarily urgent rather than romantic. I've been thinking about that, and it's tough because I think all of us have been in relationships where we get really swept up in it and we feel like, oh, this is the one, and things will progress quickly or more faster in certain relationships than others. So I don't want to rule out the possibility that this could have been real or could have been legit. But obviously, with all these other conditions we're looking at, it certainly looks like something odd is going on here, that there is a different motivating factor than just two people being in love, that someone is looking to gain in a very substantial way. But it does still hit me about what would the urgency be? Why, if you are planning on having a wedding in April of 2017, why are you going to go to the courthouse in October of 2016? And unfortunately, they did it so quickly that none of the family, none of the friends could really engage Elisa and try to get that simple question across to her and hopefully give her some room to consider what's really going on here. Why are we pushing in this way? I don't know. It's heartbreaking because you'd like to think that if she considered that maybe she would have had some indicator about, this is too fast and let's just pump the brakes and let's just get to April. We can plan a wedding like everyone else does, but that's not what happened. Brad regularly turned to Craigslist to find odd jobs. From 2014 to 2015, he worked for a concrete and yard work business where, according to the owner, Joe Pasusta, his incompetence caused untold damage. Pasusta tried to help him out by giving him work and teaching him new skills. Brad repaid him, Pasusta says, by destroying the motor of an expensive leaf vacuum, disconnecting the fuel line of a Grand Am he was supposed to be repairing, and confusing the electrical wiring inside the family's horse barn in such a way that every time Pasusta's wife flipped the light switch, it would spark, threatening to take down the entire barn and the 4 horses stabled there down in flames. Then he says Brad started leeching off another one of his employees, a woman who took him into her home rent-free, drove him to and from work, and bought his cell phone minutes, cigarettes, and liquor. It lasted a good 4 months, says Pasusta, until Brad started putting his hands on her. At 20 years old, Brad was married to a woman identified as A.J. Alexander. In 2007, he pleaded guilty to 5th-degree domestic assault. 2 years after that, A.J. turned up in the lobby of the Fillmore County Sheriff's Office with her 2 small children in tow. Her neck was red and swollen. He was ultimately convicted of domestic assault by strangulation. There were also 4 convictions for DWI, as well as a 2014 citation for animal abandonment. Elisa must have not known about the animal abandonment, says her sister Angie Gomez. If she had known about that, their relationship would have been history. I think that's probably true, and it is really unfortunate. Back to the point of what Judy was saying in this letter, it's too bad that she didn't run a background check on this guy. And I know a lot of us, live our lives in a way where we don't have to or don't necessarily want to approach things in that manner. But nowadays, with how simple it is, how quick and easy it is to do online, it's probably not a bad idea. And in particular, if you know someone's had a little bit of a rough past, even if you want to believe that you can help them and that you can move forward together and build a good life together, it still might be smart just to take a look at what that past actually is and then decide from there, is this someone that I can really trust? Or is this someone that was honest with me about all these things? Or am I finding all kinds of stuff back here that they never spoke to me about and stuff that concerns me? Something along these lines, if you're such an animal lover and you're here to help me with all my dogs, how could you have this charge? But not to mention, of course, the domestics and in particular the strangulation charge. But let's continue here. Elisa herself hinted at premarital distress. In late September, she confided to a friend, Linda Velasquez, through text, "Wedding is off, and I am with Brad now for the moment, but probably not long." Hours later, she followed up with, "We talked. I was ready to leave him. I told him if it ever happened again, it was done. He really broke my heart. He was devastated with the realization of how he behaved as he sobered up." Despite the alienation of her friends, concerns of family members, and the fights that forced them to the edge of breaking up, Elisa always found a way to accept Brad's apologies. The day they were married at the government center, Elisa told her mother and her friends that it was Brad's idea to tie the knot sooner rather than later. Elisa said he insisted she change her name right away. Interesting. Is that another indicator potentially of what he was thinking in terms of being able to acquire her assets or possibly be able to access her bank accounts? 12 hours later, she was dead. Police spent about an hour picking up evidence from Elisa's house before relinquishing all her worldly possessions to Brad. Just a few days after he'd taken control of the house, the place was mysteriously ransacked. The medical examiner ruled her cause of death was ligature hanging under uncertain circumstances. The manner of death, whether suicide or homicide, could not be determined. But here's another note, and this is why I wanted to touch on this here. Cannot exclude potential injury by another person, the medical examiner wrote. On top of that, her mother claims that when she did eventually see Elisa's body, that she noticed it looked like her forehead was swollen and bruised, and she did also note a cut on her hand. I think I've seen some other mention that there might have been some bruises on her legs as well. So it seems like there's some potential that there might have been some other violence going on around this. Elisa's friend, Chuck Radovocevic, of Miami, had been boarding a plane for Minneapolis to visit Elisa the morning of October 12th when he got a call from her cousin inviting him to the funeral. He says he was shocked and unconvinced that the woman he knew as unrelentingly bright and shiny, a ball of sunshine, would kill herself. They even had a big trip planned to go to Costa Rica in the winter to volunteer at a dog shelter, zip line, and sightsee. So this is what I'm talking about. We've got another plan here where she literally has a friend that's coming into town to visit her. And they have plans for later for a trip to Costa Rica. I'm telling you guys, it's really bothering me that there's no indicators here at all that this is someone that would have wanted to end their own life. There are plenty of indicators here of someone that is highly active, highly social, and enjoying their life significantly. So Chuck messaged Brad. Brad complained to him about having to, quote, let the herd of dogs out I inherited and take care of Elisa's house. It's all pretty much legally mine now, he said. He also needed to go to the bank to check on Elisa's accounts because, quote, meth heads looted her purse. He later confirmed that they stole all her money. Interesting. Jada and her half-brother Jess Gomez, freshly returned from Kuwait, say they were prohibited from entering their mother's house to gather belongings without Brad's explicit permission. Because the children had nothing, her mother, Judy Hunt, wanted to collect what was left of Elisa's savings to give to them. She was the beneficiary of her daughter's payable on death bank account. But by the time she had Elisa's death certificate in hand to authorize a transfer, there was nothing left. Someone had beaten her to it. Hunt says she learned from the teller on October 12th, the day after Elisa's death. So why? If we're looking at this from the perspective of this truly being Elisa ending her own life, why is her husband of 12 hours, we're now getting into this crazy 24-hour period. He marries her. He wants her to change her name. I don't know if they actually get that processed while they're at the government center. I assume that they would. I don't know how hard it is or if they got the paperwork filed or at least got it started. But we go from that to the event of her death, and then literally the following morning, someone goes and cleans out her accounts, and he's telling a friend of hers, oh yeah, some meth heads got access to her stuff. Well, how did that happen? Who let the meth heads near her purse? Sounds like it might have been some friends of his. But outside of that, why clean out the account? Who else is going to be taking money? Maybe he was worried that at some point Judy was going to come and Judy had some means of being able to access the money. It's mind-blowing. But on the plus side, I would like to think that they probably have a record of who removed that money. I don't know if they'd be able to tell her about it, so I think that's why it's being written this way. But I'm sure the bank would know who actually went to withdraw those funds. And I don't know that you can empty someone's account. I mean, if you're talking about meth heads finding your purse somewhere, I don't think that gives them the means to go and empty your account. So I don't know how much I buy that. At the time of her death, Elisa was living with Brad and two roommates, Jake McDaniel and Sharon Vestal. McDaniel was out of town attending his grandmother's funeral. But the morning after, he received an urgent email from Vestal, who told him that Elisa had killed herself and Brad's junkie friends had moved in. He decided to cut his visit short and return to Minneapolis, where he requested a police escort to help him retrieve his belongings. Sounds like Jake is a smart man. He found the house looking like the epicenter of a natural disaster. Luggage that he hadn't even had a chance to unpack from moving in had been rifled through, his things strewn in the halls. Brad told McDaniel there had been a break-in. That made sense insofar as everything of value that belonged to McDaniel had been stolen, but McDaniel couldn't help but notice that all of Brad's valuables, his TV, his computer, somehow they survived the raid of this break-in. Vestal, who lived with her two children in an upstairs room, had been present at Elisa's wedding night celebration and claimed to be the one who cut Elisa down from the rafters where Brad says he found her hanging. Vestal, one of the only people who might know the truth about what happened that night, has never given a straight answer to the desperate questions of Elisa's family and friends, they say. At first, Vestal said she was confident Elisa killed herself. And then the now defunct Minnesota Fugitive Watch Facebook page posted a photo of Brad. She posted in response to that photo, "Do you know this piece of crap? He killed my friend. Stole my children's clothes, toys, television. Throat punch him if you see him, won't you? The post has since vanished. City Pages contacted Vestal to explain. She refused. At the bottom of this article is a conversation thread, and she actually pops up in there a couple times, essentially saying that I don't know why they're saying I contradicted myself. I never contradicted myself. People seem to be asking her about the Facebook post. She says that she was told by law enforcement to remove the Facebook post. I don't know why law enforcement would necessarily say that. It's really tough to understand what's going on here. And I'm struggling with the logistics of thinking, why is she going to cut her friend down? Why are you going to cut anyone down? If you walk in on a situation like that, I think your first instinct is going to be to try to save them in some way. You might think about grabbing them and lifting them up to alleviate the pressure. But why are you going to cut them down? Possibly if you want to go into CPR or some type of action like that, but we're not seeing any reports of that either. So if you walk in and you know that they're gone, aren't you just going to call emergency services at that point? Why are you going to cut them down at all? I don't know. And if you are, you're going to use a nail clipper? Just there's aspects of this story that really don't make a whole lot of sense. And let's keep in mind the nail clipper information is coming from Judy, so that's not quite verified information, but I'm still shaking my head at it. No one lives in Elisa's house now. It was condemned because Brad never paid the bills and the city shut off the water. Of course, keep in mind, this is back in the start of 2017. I think there's probably a pretty good chance that someone's in it now. If he'd been smart, he would have made some payments on the house to keep it going. He could have inherited the house. From what I understand, it seems like Elisa had some type of possibly like a lease to own situation going on with the person that actually owned the house. So that was a comment from them saying, you know, if he was smart, he could have just kept up that agreement and eventually he would have wound up actually owning the house. But of course, he didn't. He literally paid for nothing. The house was wrecked, and then he just ups and leaves it. When Hunt was finally able to enter her daughter's home, she faced the wholesale devastation of her daughter's life and work. Everything had been spilled out of the cupboards and smashed on the floor. Trash carpeted the upstairs. Broken glass littered the kitchen. And on the living room wall, an illustration of a skull and crossbones scrawled in pink with the words, "Till death do us party." That has to be one of the worst aspects of this that I can imagine. Can you imagine going through all this, thinking that someone harmed a loved one? You finally get into their home after all this nonsense that all of a sudden that's not their home, that belongs to the person that you think ended their life. You get in there, the place is completely thrashed, and someone leaves a message like that on the wall. It is terrible. It is one of the worst things that I've seen looking into these cases. I feel horrible that Judy had to experience that and see that for herself. That is just, it's terrible. So I want to talk about some things that Judy has written up about the physical evidence and some things that don't make sense with that, and also some additional details here. So Brad claimed that she hung herself on a raw wood beam in the basement using a silk scarf. The beam was a 6x8 with a water pipe above it that the owner of the house said was nearly impossible to happen. Now, a 6x8, that's a pretty sturdy beam. I think that might be possible, but they have got some really good reasons here about why it wasn't possible. It was raw wood, and if I run my hand across it, my hand would be full of slivers. There were no wood particles in that scarf. Also, no dust particles. And when a friend of Elisa's threw something over that beam to see if it could be done, 10 years of dust fell on him. Yet there were no dust particles or wood particles on that scarf, according to David Brown, the assistant county attorney. The police were told that she was cut down with a fingernail clipper. Why would they not take that as evidence is a question here. I don't know that they actually didn't, but according to Judy's information, it seems like they didn't take that as evidence. They first told us there was no cuts in the scarf, and then they said there's a couple. Now, what I find interesting about that is if their story is legit and she was actually cut down, there should have been a section of the scarf still up there. And there should be a section where you see that cut, and then there should be a bunch of the scarf on Elisa. And that's not what's being described here. What I'm wondering is if this was staged, if you were trying to fake someone ending their life in this way, would it be that easy to do that after they've already expired, to really try to get someone up in a hanging position? I don't think it would be easy at all. I think it would take multiple people to be able to do that. And even if you could have someone hold her in the right position while someone else was on a ladder or some type of step stool or something to get high enough to try to tie off whatever was hanging them, the logistics of all that it sounds like a mess. I'm fairly confident one person alone could not do it. So is this a case where they thought about staging it to be something like that? They had to make up a story about her being cut down, and that's what we have here, a scarf with some cuts in it, but they're not saying it's severed. They don't have two pieces of scarf, at least to the information that we're reading here. So how exactly did this mechanism of cutting her down work? Not making a lot of sense here. The MPD did not do their job. They did not lock the house down and did not take evidence. They say there isn't enough evidence, but that's their fault for not getting it. But my God, is there enough circumstantial evidence to try this man and not let a murderer go free to do it again? I just want to know how differently this would have been handled if it had been one of their daughters. A very hurt mother, and what she's saying seems to make a lot of sense to me. With a case like this, I know she's looking at the circumstantial evidence. I think there's a ton of circumstantial evidence, at least to point to his motive, but I don't know how much circumstantial evidence there is to actually call it a crime scene. That's why I'm so interested in the scarf. I think the scarf tells a significant story, even more so than the nail clippers. I would really love to have some better details on the scarf, maybe some pictures. I want to see that frayed end. I want to see if it makes sense. I wish that they would do some type of testing, take a weight in there that's about the approximate weight, take another scarf of the exact same make, try to hang it up in that position, see if there's any problems in terms of just the weight handling on that beam. I don't think there necessarily would be, but then take it one step farther, try to cut it down from there and see what happens. I don't know how easy it would be to cut a silk scarf in that position, especially using the tool that they're saying was being used. So I do think that there's a lot of things that could be recreated that might give us some insight into the validity of that story. But who's going to do that? Who's going to run all those tests and do that at this point? I don't know. I will never forget October 11th, 2017, my phone call to Bradley James Alexander after I found out my daughter was gone. I called him up and told him I wanted answers. He said, "Okay, you want answers? Here it is. We got married. My friends came over. She didn't like them. We got into an argument and I found her effing body hanging. There you go." I have not spoken to him since. I hope and pray that I see him in court being charged for Elisa's murder. And then at the bottom of her letter, she's saying, "Will you be the one to help me?" And that's a big part of the reason why I wanted to do this today. Let's continue, because believe it or not, that is not the end of the saga for Brad Alexander. Over here at KXII.com, 2 Minnesotans arrested in Oklahoma. A Minnesota couple is in jail this evening. This is from August 2017. After entering a Garvin County home without permission Thursday while high on meth and allegedly smoking the drug in front of their 2 small children. Well, if Brad is a meth user, then his statement about meth heads coming and stealing all of Elisa's money might not be so inaccurate. Homeowner Monica Galeland said her 23-year-old son called her about strangers at their Wynwood home. He said there was a man in the house bringing clothes in and asked me if I let him in. And I said no, Galeland said. I told him to call the cops. Well, guess who the cops are? Her husband comes home. He happens to be a Murray County deputy, and he scared them off before she arrived, before his wife got home, though their car and belongings remained. But then Garvin County deputies got there, and they found one of the suspects, Kim Mendoza, the woman, and her 4- and 5-year-old daughters hiding behind their home. The other suspect, Brad Alexander, was found later that evening at a bar down the road. So according to the information I have, he was actually kicked back to Minnesota, and I believe he is sitting in jail here until November of this year. What's going to happen after that, I have no idea. I would love to see this be one of those situations where police have been doing their footwork, just haven't been communicating with the family well. They've got a whole case ready against this guy, and as soon as he goes for release, they lock him back up and turn him around and put him back in jail. Or possibly this guy's talking. Maybe he's talking to inmates, fellow cellmates. Maybe they come forward and share some of that information with law enforcement. Something along those lines. I truly feel someone out there has to know. I can't believe that a guy that lives this recklessly would be able to keep his mouth shut about what he's done in this case. And I did bump into some information where it's not really confirmed, so I don't want to go too far into it, but it does sound like he's made a threat to a woman since then, where he's alluding to the fact that he doesn't need a weapon, that basically he is capable of killing someone without a weapon. Not an admission of guilt by any means, but I would like to think that a guy that's getting messed up like this and putting himself in these crazy situations and not showing any respect for anything around him would have loose enough lips that someone out there might have heard something. If you are that person, please use the contact details that I have in the description box below and send that information in. And maybe we can get this case moving again. That's really what I'm hoping. But on top of that, there's some other things the family's trying. And for that, we're jumping over to change.org. We have a petition here. I've already signed it myself. I hope you guys will be moved to do the same. Let me share with you what this is about. This petition is written up by Elisa's sister. My family has met with the homicide investigators about the case, and even though they do not think there is sufficient evidence to refer the case to the county attorney's office, we believe that her case deserves more attention. We would like to meet with a member of the county attorney's office to discuss this matter further. Even though the case is still considered to be active, the police have no further evidence to pursue a homicide investigation and are no longer investigating the case. It is our hope that this petition will prompt further investigation that is sorely needed by the Minneapolis Police Department. So right now they're trying to get to 5,000 signatures. They're at 3,397. If you are a friend of this channel, if you consider yourself a brain scratcher, please, please, please do me a favor. It only takes a minute or two. If you're signed up, it literally takes seconds. But if you haven't signed up for change.org yet, it's a quick and easy process. It'll take you a minute or two tops. And you can add your voice to this and hopefully bring some more attention to Elisa's case. It's really tough. I don't know where else to go with this one because I understand that there is a lack of physical evidence. I'm still interested. I told you my questions about the physical evidence that we do know about, but obviously this isn't a case where new details are going to come out through physical evidence because the processing of the scene doesn't seem like it happened with a homicide in mind. But this is one of those cases that is just so heartbreaking. I hit a couple of these a year, and I usually wind up doing a donation. So it's that time. I haven't done it in a while. So once again, I'm going to make a donation on behalf of myself, my amazing supporters through PayPal and Patreon. We're going to make a donation to the National Domestic Violence Hotline. And on top of that, I wanted to share some statistics with you guys from the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. On average, nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner in the United States. During 1 year, this equates to more than 10 million women and men. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men have been victims of severe physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. On a typical day, there are more than 20,000 phone calls placed to domestic violence hotlines nationwide. That's a big part of the reason why I want to support the hotline.org. Intimate partner violence accounts for 15% of all violent crime. Domestic victimization is correlated with a higher rate of depression and suicidal behavior. So I'll also have a link to this in the description box below if you want to read up more on these statistics. It's shocking. The numbers are staggering. And there's a good chance at some point in your life that if you don't go through a situation like this, you're going to know someone that's going through a situation like this. So I hope that you'll keep the hotline.org in mind as a resource and pass that on to friends or family that might need it, or keep that in mind if you ever do find yourself in that situation as well. Before we end today's episode, I want to thank several people that have donated to the channel through PayPal, starting with L. Fletcher, Allison Fraley, Danielle Barr, Melissa Campbell, Linda Morawski, and good friend to the channel, Christy Groves. Thank you each for supporting the channel, keeping me here doing what I'm doing, and doing donations to great organizations like the National Domestic Violence Hotline. So what do you think, Brain Scratchers? What's going on with this case? How will it be solved? Let's talk about that in the comments down below. And I ask we please stay respectful. We have children of Elisa's that could be seeing this. I'm almost more than certain that her mother's going to be seeing this. So let's please make sure that we keep the comments respectful down there. I'd truly appreciate that. Take care, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend. Keep yourselves and your families safe and happy. And I'll see you back here on Monday with a brand new episode of 3 Men and a Mystery on the Lord and Arts channel.